Hello and welcome back to Toys Thursday with Johnny Tiger. The date is May 14, 2020, week number 10 of the coronavirus, staying at home, social distancing, and all that good stuff. And right before you, in front of the camera, this is for the benefit of those viewers that may be blind or visually impaired, you're looking at the action figure of a gargoyle. More specifically, the gargoyle known as Cold Stone. That's kind of funny. The gargoyle named Cold Stone. Now, I don't know how many of you remember the Gargoyles cartoon in the 90s. I'll admit, I did not get into a lot of American or Canadian cartoons as a child. Growing up in Taiwan, the kind of cartoon that we were exposed to for a large part were Japanese cartoons. So you can say, while a lot of teenagers in North America are barely discovering anime in their teenage years, I grew up on anime and Japanese influenced cartoons. This made it really difficult for me to appreciate American and Canadian cartoons. For those of you who don't know what I am talking about, Japanese cartoons are a lot more adult oriented. Now, that is not to say that they're erotic or anything, although there's definitely some element of that. Just turning the gargoyle around so you can get a side profile of this bad boy. What I mean by saying that the Japanese cartoons were more adult oriented is they very rarely uh, sugarcoat things. When things die, when people die, they die. When monsters get killed, they look like they get killed. When there's supposed to be blood, there's blood everywhere on the screen. Violence were not sugarcoated or avoided. Their cartoons were not designed specifically to instill some moral value in the children. Quite often, the cartoon is just there to tell a good story, and that's it. It's just there for the eye candy or there for the visual effect. They did not have the same obsession as Western cartoons. I think children have to learn from this. When Japanese people made cartoons, for the most part, they just want you to enjoy it. That's it. Now you get a back view of Cold Stone. Very, very impressive wings there. Now, as I said, I did not enjoy a lot of American or white people cartoons, but Gargoyle was one of the ones that I really, really loved. It was put up by Disney. The action figures of Gargoyles were put up by Kenner. Now, why did I like Gargoyles in specific? Because Gargoyles was one of the cartoons that weren't made in Japan, that was very mature for its time. We have a show of medieval monstrous warriors coming to grip with waking up in a modern time and have to cope with trying to blend in uh, and trying to get used to their new role in the new world. And then you have a bad guy whose goal is not something stupid like I want to destroy the world, I want to destroy you all. No, the on Gargoyle, the bad guy, his motive was very believable. His motive was just he wanted to make money. He wanted to find ways to make money, and that was it. So it was a very mature cartoon considering uh, the age group it was aimed for and the place it came from. That's why I really liked it. However, I did not really get to watch the cartoon until I was already grown up, until I started living on my own, and I actually downloaded the entire run of the cartoon and binge watched that. Because when I was a teenager, my English comprehension was not strong enough for me to really appreciate the cartoon when it was airing on TV. Now let's talk about Cold Stone a little bit before we go back into my childhood. Cold Stone here stands roughly 6 inches tall and has a pretty impressive wingspan, probably I would say almost 6 inches wide, depending on if you post him with the blades on his wings in or out. As you can see, or maybe you can't, Cold Stone is a robotic, half robotic gargoyle. And this is because in the show, he's actually a slain warrior. He's a gargoyle that was destroyed, and the villain Zenato found the remains of Cold Stone and mixed his DNA and his flesh with modern robotic technology. He was trying to create like a Terminator gargoyle or a Frankenstein gargoyle, and this was the result. Of all the gargoyles on the show, Cold Stone was my favorite because he was very uh, skilled in battle, and he had kind of a split personality. Sometimes he's good, sometimes he's evil, and for the most part, he was just really angry for what the human had done to his body. And I really like that motivation, that character profile. Not to mention a half robotic gargoyle is just really, really cool. If you can see that his right arm is like a flamethrower or missile launcher, and his wings are this mechanic looking like uh, uh, metal looking thing with blades on them. His tail as well look like has been replaced with a mechanical device. His chest as well, and his face. This is just one of those action figures that even if I didn't like the show, I really would like the action figure just based on design alone. Uh, he is articulated at the blades on his wings. The wings themselves are not articulated, although, like all gargoyle toy, the wings can come off. You can take the wings off. You can take the tail off. Well, it's not coming off right now. I'm not going to force it because this is a very, very old toy, and I'm not going to risk breaking it because I like him so much. Uh, the arms move at the shoulder. The legs move at the side or at the hip. Uh, the head, the neck is supposed to move, but because of his long hair, it's not going to go anywhere. The head is not going to rotate at all because of the hair. But as far as the mid 90s action figure goes, that's pretty decent articulation. Now, I will say one thing I really don't like about Cold Stone, and in fact, most of the Gargoyle action figures, is that they fall apart really easily. Like, I'll show you. If I just grab him the wrong way, the wing pop off, and things start coming apart. So when you're handling these figures, when you're displaying them, it can get extremely frustrating because they tend to drop a bit of themselves here, drop a bit of themselves there, and you always have to worry about putting them back together. So unless you play with your toy, if you're just using them for display purposes, I would actually highly recommend just super glue their tail, super glue their wings on them, because you're never going to display them without wings anyway. That would be weird, a gargoyle without wings. So you might as well just super glue that together. Cold Stone here was released in 1996, and I acquired him in 1997. And ever since then, he has been one of my favorite character design, my favorite action figure in my collection, my favorite gargoyle in the cartoon. He wasn't my first gargoyle, however. In the past episode, we talked about how my younger brother was the one that helped me shop for action figures when I was a teenager. However, he wasn't always there. Prior to the age of 15, I did not live with my younger brother and my other step siblings or half siblings. I mostly lived with my mother and her housemaids or servants or whatever you would call them, people that would look after me while my mom looked after business. So how did I get action
The
figures
time is
back
now
then?
10 p.m.
Well, thank you very much for interrupting me. So how did I get action figures before my younger brother was there to go shopping with me? Well, back then, prior to I would say 1995, prior to 1995, I was pretty much at the mercy of my mom. Uh, Whenever my mom went out shopping or went traveling the world to different countries and different continents, she would always keep an eye open and she would bring home action figures and toys that she thought I would like. A lot of these were not available in Taiwan at the time, and gargoyles was one of those. I remember my first gargoyle was the gargoyle's leader, Goliath, in stone armor, released in 1995. And I received that as a gift from my mom when she returned from a trip to Hong Kong. That was the same year I and my mom came to Canada, returned to Canada from Taiwan. But I received my first gargoyle earlier in the year prior to our trip. And I remember opening that action figure and I was so excited. I was so amazed at the character design because there's no such thing as gargoyles in Chinese culture. So that type of monster, that type of character was totally new, totally foreign to me, and I had no concept of its backstory, of what it was supposed to be, and in my brain, I just started conjuring up all kinds of stories, and imagination just ran free because this is the beauty when you don't know the backstory of an action figure. When you don't know the backstory, you can actually use your imagination and make up stories for them yourself. And sometimes that's actually a lot more fun than going by their official stories. I'm trying to make sure that he doesn't tip over. Uh, Another thing about these gargoyle figures, they don't balance very well sometimes because of the wings on their back. So, 1995, I got my first gargoyle, Goliath. And ever since then, I started to want more characters from the cartoon, and I wanted to find out more about them. At one point, I would say around 1997, I had the entire cast of gargoyles in my collection. As I mentioned before, my collection was a lot larger back then than they are now. Uh, Unfortunately, I later sold everyone except Cold Stone to a toy store because I ran into some trouble and really needed money, and I decided that I was too old for toys now. I was getting interested in girls and getting interested in other grown-up adult things, chiefly beer, cigarette, marijuana. You know how it goes. And so I sold the major part of my collection, the ones that weren't stolen from my stay at foster home. Um, so by the time I moved out and started living on my own, my collection was down to maybe 20 action figures, and I had to rebuild from there. Cold Stone here was one of the figures that was one of my favorites, so he did not get sold uh, during the great purge of action figures. There's actually another feature in this action figure that is really cool. There's a button on his back, and when I press the button, the faces inside his chest monitor will change. I don't know if you guys can see his chest. I hope so, because it's a really cool gimmick that you don't see on many action figures. Uh, Let me try that. Uh, there we go. Hold him a little bit higher so hopefully you guys can see. Hopefully you guys can see that because that is, I mean, even though I can't see it because of being blind, uh, but that is a really interesting design on an action figure. You don't see that in many action figures. Uh, to Not many action figures have a button on the back that would allow an internal display to change inside their chest. So that's another reason why Cold Stone was very, very special for me as an action figure because of this very unique action feature, even though it really doesn't do that much for me personally. So I'm going to include this link to the excerpt from the old Gargoyles cartoon in the description of this episode. For those of you who are interested, or if you have kids that you think might be interested, it's really, really worthwhile chasing down the entire run. And you can find a lot of those on YouTube right now. Uh, Again, it was released by Disney. Uh, I say it's probably a little bit more on the PG side because there are parts of it that were a little bit more uh, uh, adult or mature or uh, uh, not to say it was sexual or anything, but it was definitely something that I think kids, young kids might have a little bit harder time following the motives of the characters because the characters were a little bit more complex than in a lot of other cartoons in that same age group. You know, when you watch Thundercat, when you watch G.I. Joe, you get a very clear sense of whose motive is what. Why they want to do things. Good guys because they're good guys. And bad guys because they're bad guys. The bad guy's going to destroy the world, good guy's going to save the world. But in Gargoyles, it's not as black and white. In Gargoyles, the bad guys sometimes do good things because it helps him make money, and sometimes good guys will do things are not so good because they are having problem understanding that violence is not as readily accepted in the modern world as it was 1,000 years ago when gargoyles were plentiful. So it's a much more complex show, and I hope that if you do find it, you will enjoy it. Thank you for checking out this episode of Toy Thursday. Stay strong, stay healthy, and we'll be back tomorrow for some workout during our Fitness Friday. Have a good night.